The Bigger Person is the 23rd episode of Season 6 of Everybody Loves Raymond. This one is directed by Gary Halvorson, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. It is a good episode. I said at the end of the previous episode that I didn't mind it being a two-parter, but I've now learned that it's a three-parter, and I don't know if that's necessary, but I will reserve full judgment until I've watched the next episode. There will be spoilers from now as I go through this episode and share some thoughts. And this one starts off at Marie and Frank's. Everybody's there except Debra, and Ray tells Frank that they can kind of get what they want out of this situation. To recap very briefly from the previous episode, Marie and Debra are no longer talking. And Ray has realised that he can kind of manipulate the situation to get what he wants. So Frank gives it a go. And he tells Marie, "You're right, we're really making a mess here with crumbs and things, so we'll just go over the road to Debra's." And of course Marie doesn't want that, so she offers Frank some grilled cheese. And Frank realises, yeah, Ray's right. And he even says to Ray, "I love you," which I thought was really, really sweet. And then we're over the road, and Debra is sick of Marie calling. She doesn't want her calling the house anymore. And then when Debra's out of the room rather, Marie scurries over with some stuffed mushrooms because she knows the snack options at Ray and Debra's that aren't that great. There aren't that many options. And Debra walks in the room at that point. And this is where I think they're really behaving like children. They're allowed to not want to talk to each other. You're allowed to not want to communicate with somebody, but they won't even look at each other. And they don't seem to realise that, okay, so Frank and Ray are making use of the situation. They're still kind of tearing the family apart but because of this feud. They need to at least learn to be civil, and it was just so uncomfortable. Effective, very well done, but really, really uncomfortable. And Marie starts being really nice to Frank, so Debra starts being really nice to Ray, and they're kind of seeing who can be the nicest to their husband, and it's such a bizarre situation. And the only person who isn't getting anything out of this, out of the three guys, is Robert. He thinks this is disgusting. Frank and Ray shouldn't be taking advantage of the situation, and I feel like it was really important to have that neutral ground. Because Debra's annoyed but Ray is benefiting, Marie is annoyed but Frank is benefiting. Robert isn't directly affected in terms of his marriage, but obviously it's still his family. And he goes to talk with Debra in the bedroom, and Debra said that for once she just needs to think about herself, which I don't think is true. When you're in a family, you have to understand that your actions will affect other people. Again, I don't think she should be forced to speak with Marie if she doesn't want to, but there's a right way and a wrong way to go about it, and I think they're both going about it the wrong way. And Robert responds to this by saying, "I know that Raymond's thinking about himself," and he kind of reveals to Debra that Ray is taking advantage of the situation. And Robert then speaks with Marie and basically gives her the same. And then we see the aftermath. And I do think we could have got a little bit more out of this. Ray is with Debra and they start to argue, but it fizzles out really, really quickly. And there's a reason why we didn't see the full argument. It's something that happens that's funny in a moment, but I think they ended it a little too abruptly. I think we could have had a little bit more out of it to really see how Debra was feeling. But then we cut to Marie and Frank comes home. Marie offers him a sandwich, and she keeps up pretenses for maybe a minute as she offers him the kind of bread that he wants, and then she takes the loaf of bread and repeatedly hits him. And as she said, she wishes it was stale so she could give him a concussion, which is not great, but that was her unleashing her anger after finding out that Frank was also taking advantage of the situation. And yes, that was quite funny, but then, and this is why they cut the argument with Debra short, because Ray then comes over with his bent golf putter. And it was just a really funny moment, so I don't think we should have seen the entire argument with Ray and Debra, because then we wouldn't have had that moment. But I think just a little bit more, because it did end really, really abruptly. And then Ray and Frank begin to question why Marie and Debra suddenly turned on them. And Robert comes over just at that moment, and it becomes very, very clear. And then the phone rings just once, which is Debra's signal. And then it rings again, and Robert tells Marie, this is your chance to make it right. Marie's not having any of it, and Robert leaves really dramatically. And then we have the final scene, which it was fine. I didn't care for it too much. Ray tries to sneak out of the house, and Debra follows back in, and I did like this bit. Frank is making himself a sandwich, and Marie sits down at the table, and it seemed like maybe for a teeny tiny second she was going to say something nice to him. They were going to have a heart to heart. No, she just pulls his plate towards her and eats the sandwich, which I loved. And then we end with Robert in bed, not being able to sleep restfully as he thought he would. And then we have To Be Continued. And as I said, at the moment, while I felt like the previous episode benefited from being a two-parter, I don't at the moment feel like it needed to be in 3 parts, but the next episode could be absolutely phenomenal. I really cannot remember. It's been a very long time since I saw it. I have no idea what to expect next. So I'm looking forward to finding out. As I said, I don't necessarily think it needed to be in 3 parts, but I could completely change my mind about that. And that being said, the most important thing is that I enjoyed this episode. I thought The Bigger Person was really entertaining, definitely a lot of fun with some great moments. A few things here and there I think could have been a little bit better, but ultimately I rather enjoyed the episode.